Okay, let's get started. We're going to, as I say, we have a big crowd today. Let's see here. Well, I thought people would be rushing back because you got your results from the midterm. I was quite, overall, I was quite pleased with the performance that people made. I adjusted the score up very clearly when you signed there. I adjusted it slightly. The pre adjustment average was about 79%, which I thought was quite good, and the post was 83 at 83%. That was the average. Top score was, I think, 101.2. It was in 99 point something, 99.3 or something. We had two people right at almost really perfect scores, and I thought it wasn't an easy exam. I think other people thought so as well. I was quite pleased overall. I do want to point out on future work, I want to make this clear. I want you to use software, graphic software. Please do not send me any more pictures, photographs of work. Don't want any of that. I'm not going to give any score for that. It's just, and one of the things I've noticed is that people that rely on that are tending to do lower. And I've noticed that last year and this year especially. So these are important skills to be able to learn, to learn the graphic software and Excel. It's something you really need to learn. I want to encourage you to use that. Otherwise, as I see people, I thought that people did very well on the last question. Some people got, I think at least 3 people got a perfect score on the last question. They got a full 10. There was some very good. There was that. As I say, in general, the scores were quite. It certainly was higher than I expected. I didn't think it was an easy exam, but I think it was an opportunity for you to learn a lot about what you to really kind of put things together. The only thing I noticed, and everyone got it wrong on the second problem. Everyone missed this. I asked you about the prices for the last 3 things that you had purchased in a convenience store, and I said, well, what's the satisfaction that you received for each pair of goods? And that was the one thing everyone got. No one got that correct, and which is interesting because I think I'm going to have to. Well, when no one gets it correct, then I start thinking maybe I'm doing something wrong. I'm not making that clear enough. But the point here is that this is a tool. It's a way of thinking, and sometimes it's not easy. Learning economics is like learning any kind of new skill. It's about changing the way you think. And here you have, if something costs 200 yen and something else costs 100 yen, from the marginal utility, the ratio of the marginal utility to of X, the price of X equals Y, the price of Y, any 2 goods, that's for any 2 goods. That condition. We've shown that in theory. That's economic theory that tells us that when we're maximizing our utility, when we're doing the best we can, and we know we do the best we can because more is better. We want to do as well as we can. And we do as well as we can in that, and that's simply, that's the ratio of the price to the marginal utilities. That's simply that. And so we can't measure this, but this we can measure very easily. It's just what you paid. This is the ratio of what you paid. And that's simply it. That is it. So that's something I want you to realize. That's one of the tools that you have. One of the tools you have to think clearly. And that's the thing. Look back at what you wrote. People were trying to guess, how much satisfaction they were getting. Well, the clear way to think about it is it's the price ratio. That's the satisfaction you got, because that's why you bought it. If not, you wouldn't have bought those items. And that on the margin in that moment, that was the satisfaction that you got out of making those purchases. So that's the kind of thing I want you to think about, just in your daily life. When you're able to think about those things in your daily life, then you're able to think, to see what other people do and think about how they think and the things that they do. And then to understand yourself better, to understand what other people do better. So that's the purpose. So keep that in. That's the kind of thing, the kind of tools and thinking that we can learn in economics. I'm going to begin the lecture today talking about market-based externalities. I think I went over this at the end. The topic of external scale economies. That is things that are outside of firms and households that we take, that we can benefit from just by being there, just by being in a place. And I mentioned about how just go down the street here, Montesando, along there, and you can see this kind of thing. This is Ginza, but it's the same thing. It's called a high street. It's a high street retailing. It's the high quality, high end retailing. That's an example from Ginza. And why they cluster together, because it attracts people who want to go there to experience that environment, and it may be the environment both for the specific things that they want to buy, but it can also be just the general environment. People want to go there, look at other people, feel that they're having a certain kind of prosperity. That's why people go to places like this. Is where people go to see and be seen, and also to experience the opportunity. At a low cost in terms of time, you can get around and see a lot of goods, a lot of goods and services available in a place like that. And this, of course, is just around the corner there. That's the Parada building, that particular one. But along that main strip, some of the high-end retailers retailing in this city are in these areas. As I say, you'll see that. You go around the city and you'll see those kinds of clusters. They're clustering. They not just Ginza, Montesando, you see them in Shibuya, Shinjuku, Ueno, in your neighborhood. All of that is because that there are advantages. People do that because there are advantages even when firms are competing, there's advantages to being close together, because it makes it easier for people to find them. And I think I did mention this at the end, but this is a very important, it's an information-based externality. And we see this kind of thing around the world, these kind of clusters of large office buildings in city centers. And what's going on there? What's going on there is that people in this building, maybe there's in fact, I know somebody that, I have a friend that owns a firm in that building. They do real estate advisory. So their clients are here. So they'll go out and they meet somebody to do a transaction or to advise them on a transaction. Well, they'll just go out and walk down the street or take a cab and talk to them. It's very easy for them to do that. There's a lot of media businesses here. There's other financial services, all of those kinds of businesses that are banking, other financial services that all kind of cluster together. It's easy to get around and meet people and do transactions. Now we have the phone, we have the internet, we have Skype, but in the end, going out and meeting people face to face, there's something about that interaction. We develop trust. We can feel more comfortable with people if we see them in person, as opposed to just seeing them on a screen. They're real. There's something about that interaction, and that's why even in spite of the improvement in technology, in telecommunication, communication technology, people are still, if anything, even more clustering. These are getting even more concentrated, and you see that in Tokyo. Certainly in my time in this city, I've seen this city become much more concentrated. When I first came here, the office market was spread all over the city. It was very, very inefficient. It was very inefficient. It was getting around, having meetings. People were here, there. It was all day long. You were on the train just to go to 2 or 3 meetings a day. Now it's much more focused. There's much more building in the city center on Tokyo Station and places like that. And so it's a lot easier to get around in a much more efficient city. And there are reasons why. There's advantages, there's transactions, potential transactions there. And so that closeness, that proximity makes those transactions easier. I also want to talk in terms of increasing returns to scale. I think I might have mentioned this. I think I did. I think I mentioned this at the end. You're right. I did. So I won't talk about the ants again, but I think I'm going to give you some kind of exercise question and ask you to specify an ant production function. What ants do to... now I'm going to go, I think I might have talked a little bit about this at the end, but I want to go over this because this is a very, very important concept of network externalities. Network externalities, they are, what's interesting about a network externality, this is, it's both on the supply and the demand side, between firms and households, between households, between firms and households, between firms and firms. The kind of interaction, it's communication-based. It's communication-based externalities. And where does it come from? It comes from the size of a network. It's a network size. And what it means is as the network increases in size, the network becomes more valuable. This especially in this era, in this era of the internet, this is increasingly, modern communication technology, internet-based, mobile phone-based, the kind of communication that can take place is something very dramatic, and it's based on the size of the network. So as the network increases in size, now the original network was a telecommunication network, and so the way to think about it is, if you have one person, let's just think back to a telephone, and much of my life it was just telephones. In fact, I was around long before there were mobile. Mobile phones was something that you saw in cartoons. When I was a kid, there was a cartoon character called Dick Tracy, and he had a kind of and he would talk into his phone. He was like a detective. He would talk into his phone, and I thought that was really cool. Well, eventually, that was around early 1960s. That became reality. I've seen that become reality in my lifetime. Now it's like people. Now you see people walk around and look. There was a time where people would walk around, and if they were talking to themselves, you would think there was something wrong with them. And now you see people walking around and talking, now you realize they're having a conversation with somebody. And, so that's changed as well. But if you have, let's go back to, if somebody has there's only one telephone, what's the value of the phone? 0. Absolutely, yes. Nothing. There's no value. You can't call anybody. There's no other person with a phone that can call you. Now, then you add a second person. The second person gets a phone. Or, actually, the telegraph, which was even before the phone, in the mid-19th century. So now you have 2 people. That's great. Now they can talk. So now now there's a communication that can take place. But there's only 2 people, and usually after a while, unless there's really a lot to talk about, they can get really, they might get bored with communicating just with each other. And so if you add, and this is just one, that's one, that's one interaction. Well, if we add just a third person, then we increase it to 3 interactions. So that triples the number of interactions. And that goes up and up with the more people, the network gets bigger and bigger, it gets the more potential interactions. And this is at least based on that idea. Based on that idea, the number of potential interactions as a function of the number of members n in the network is that, n minus 1 to the summation I equals 1 to n minus 1. So the marginal increase in the number of potential interactions for each n is n minus 1. So as the network grows, each additional person that grows, the number of interactions increases at a almost exponential rate. It's a very powerful concept, and it drives the advantages, the benefits that come from a network. Now, what's interesting now is that I was thinking about this, and this really talks more about the old telecommunication network, where here, yes, you can talk to one person, and but when you're communicating, you're usually just communicating one-to-one. Now, the interesting thing about the internet is now we're now able to communicate. This is a kind of a 2-dimensional communication. Now it's really a 3-dimensional. It's 3-dimensional because now multiple people can communicate at the same time. So, and this is, I've never really thought about this, but now I think this is a good way to describe it, is that now it's in a 3rd dimension where people now can have simultaneous communication at the same time. Now, if you're, for example, if you're in an electronic market, that's when, let's say like you're trading stocks, but that's been around for a while. Now what we have markets, social interaction, that's what a social network, Twitter, Facebook, you can talk to 5, 10, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 people at the same time. The President of the United States communicates, or depending upon how you feel about it, miscommunicates with millions of people instantly. And so the power, there's a tremendous, it isn't just one-to-one anymore. It's now multiple people at the same time that can interact simultaneously. And it causes a massive increase in the power of the network. The network is now increasing dramatically in power. And one of the ways that does that, now you may say, well, Twitter and things like Twitter and Facebook or other Line or other things like that, well, there's a lot of stupid conversation that goes on, and that's certainly true. One of the things that we've discovered, one of the things that the internet has certainly taught me is that most of the time, most of us never have anything really interesting or profound to say. It's usually just a lot of noise. But we really enjoy it anyway. And we get a lot, and that, at least we get that benefit out of it. But that said, there's also interaction, economic interaction that can take place as well in this three-dimensional network. Now I just want to talk about this. This gives you the example in terms of the network size, and this is just the two-dimensional network now. It's the two-dimensional network. Two-dimensional network, you go from 0 possible interactions, 25, you have 300. You double that, it's more than 4 times. Double it again, it's 4 times more. Every doubling, it's about a 4-time increase for every doubling. It's just about 4. So 2,000 people can interact in 1,990,000 different potential interactions. Okay. Now some of them don't take place because you may have people that aren't interested in talking to each other. But when you have the third dimension and you can get that kind of simultaneous contact, actually what happens now, the potential numbers increase dramatically. And when we talk about the businesses that are organizing themselves around that, then that becomes very powerful. I just want to go back and, as I say, the thing is that the other thing in terms of the value of the network, it also has to do with what people are willing to pay. And basically, once the network becomes large enough, everybody wants one. Everybody wants to join the network. Everybody wants to be involved. Everybody wants to have a phone. Everybody here has a mobile phone. So some of us still have this, but most of you have iPhones or some type of phone like that. And other types of communication. People have Facebook. Most people now have Facebook. So that's the application that's on top of the network, and those are applications that actually create that three-dimensional network that expands the power of the network. And the interesting thing, we can go back, and I think a good way to think about the power of electronic communications. We go back to the first. It was the telegraph. Telegraph was the first electronic communication device. So you're talking about all of human history. The only way that people could communicate until the 1830s was you could have some kind of signals. People could send signals, like people smoke signals. People could signal by fire or light, a lighthouse. So you could communicate that way and send messages over a distance, so that especially with light, that you could send a message, but that's still quite limited, and the amount of information that you could send is quite limited. But when the electronic, the telegraph, and I say this was to understand how important electronic communications are. Before 1850, cities were relatively small around the world. Tokyo was actually one of the largest cities in the world at that time, probably more than 1 million population. There were a handful of cities that were that big in the entire world. After 1850, and the invention of the telegraph, just the invention of that, the people could send. The wires went up, especially in the United States. First, the United States, it went up. There was a surge of construction of telegraph lines in the 1850s. They went up, and it had a dramatic impact on the economy. And one of the things it did was it enabled markets to get big. Remember when we talked about markets? The size of the bigger the potential market, the more firms can spring into existence, can come into existence to serve that market. Well, so with communications, people could find out what the market condition was in another city, and they could find out simultaneously. So businesses were able to take advantage of that. Businesses got bigger, which made cities bigger. And the industrial age really took off after 1850. Between 1850 and 1900, there were dramatic growths in city size. New York, this is a great example, under 400,000 in 1840. 60 years later, just a lifetime later, less than a lifetime, it was almost 10 times bigger. The city was New York City in 60 years grew up by almost 10 times. It's almost 3.5 million. London, 1841, Greater London was 2.2 million. 1901, 60 years later, was over 6.5 million. This was the growth of telecommunication, communication technology was largely responsible. Tokyo again, Tokyo of almost a 4-time growth in just 35 years. Tokyo exploded in size in the late 19th century. And this was a global phenomenon that was driven by communications, the development of electronic communications. So you think about that, and so I think the good thing there is to think about what happened when that came in. Now in your lifetime, the internet, basically when you were born, almost didn't exist. I mean, I was on the internet. I had something that was early, even before the, well, I was on the internet, it was an academic, universities had access to the internet in the late 1980s or early 1990s. So I had access to the internet, but all we did was we were able to send, sometimes data sets or messages, but nobody really used it very much. When I was a graduate student, nobody made much, it was there, but nobody made much use of it. And then you had the first early 1990s, there were the beginning services that were like the internet, but it wasn't until the mid-1990s that the browser was invented. The browser was invented about 1995. Netscape, the company called Netscape came up with the Mozilla browser, 1995, and boom, it was explosion happened. But I remember about 1997, sitting down with somebody that I knew, a marketing guy, and we were talking about the internet, and I remember telling him that there were 2 companies in Japan that had websites. 1997, 20 years ago, 2 companies had websites. Everybody has websites. Everyone. So think about that explosion in communications that's happened in the last 20 years, and the impact that that's going to have on economies. I think we're just beginning to see it. I think we're going to see a real explosion. You're going to see in your lifetime, your career, your life, and you're coming along right at this time. You people have born into that era, and you're growing up in it, and you now are going to experience the explosion during your career. It's an exciting time. Most times they're exciting times to be alive anyway, but I think this is a really fascinating time to be in the early 20s. This is a really exciting time to be the age that you're at now. So one of the things in terms of that, I want to talk about. Let's see, I've kind of already talked about. This. Let's talk about something called, and one of the aspects of this is what's called the on-demand economy. The on-demand economy. The improvements in communication technologies have been able, and it's to be connected. And as I said, it's the simultaneous connection, not just one-on-one, but the multiple connection. And of course, markets have existed for that. Markets have existed in order to facilitate communication and to facilitate economic interaction. And electronic networks have been around for a while, but the difference now is that they're so low cost. It costs almost nothing the networks 40 years ago were very expensive and they were closed. These are now open networks. And the thing is, what's happening is that if somebody wants a good or service, it's easy in a way that never before in human history, over a broad area, over a huge number of people, to connect people who want a good or service with someone who can provide that good or service. For example, last year I went back to my hometown in this U.S. state of Michigan, and where did I stay? Well, I stayed at Airbnb. Found some guy that had, and it was cheaper than a hotel, and it was in the area of the city that I wanted to stay. I stayed there and had a very interesting experience in my hometown, and it was it was a very professional experience. But that was enabled. I just got on the internet here, found somebody. Well, could find some possibilities, saw where it was, saw a picture of what was available, signed up, all done online. You can do all of that, as you know, online. And so what it's called, where you create these kind of electronic markets, is called the on-demand economy or the access economy. And the way this definition of that is a business model where goods and services trade on the basis of access rather than ownership. And it refers to renting things temporarily rather than selling them permanently. So one of the things this is also going to do, it's going to enable people to, we don't have to own things necessarily anymore. No, we can if we want, but we can just rent them. We can rent cars, we can rent now almost anything. You can get on rent anything now. You don't need it. People in large cities don't need cars anymore. You don't need a car. There's Uber and other, including taxis, but there's at a relatively low cost. Somebody can drive you around. Somebody can there's all kinds of things that can be done. Now I'm going to look at a couple of examples of this. And what I'm going to do, what's interesting, one of the things that I want to do here, I want you to think about this, because your next exercise, I'm going to want you to look for these companies. Now I've done this the first couple of years, and but I'm going to do it a little, and where I've said to people to look up stuff and get some companies, and some people have to do some work, and some people tell me that they've discovered Amazon, and or Line or Hulu or something like that. I want what I'm going to be looking for, and one of the things I'm interested in doing is finding out in this country or China or other countries that you may be familiar with, find out what kind of things small companies that maybe nobody's ever heard of, that's going on out there. And one of the things that I've done, what I'm going to, and what I want you to do, is I'm going to take people finding these companies, telling you a little bit about them, and then I'm going to put those on a list so everybody's going to find out about them. Now the reason why this is, I think, is interesting, there's two things. One, we can create a network, an externality, that say if each person in the class finds two companies, and you make a list, and let's say there's 11, 12 people in the class, so each people find two, I make a list, now you got 20 companies. Now what's interesting about that also is the way I want you to think about this is these might be companies that you may work at. This could be where you could get your job. Your first job out of school could be with companies like these, because these companies are going to be growing. And so this is an opportunity for you to dig and find some interesting companies, and for your classmates to do that. And so if we go and do that, I want to try to do this in a way that that people really dig out some interesting companies. And suddenly you could have a list of 20 companies that you might find, oh, gee, well maybe I should contact that company. I'm a student, I'm interested, gee, that looks like an interesting company, I'd like to go and work for you. So that's the kind of thinking that I want you to do. And so here's what I've done. I've taken 2 companies, just pulled them. This took me about 3 minutes to do. So I'm not talking about anything that's really long. We're not talking about a tremendous amount of effort, really, but which tells you it's so easy to find these companies. This is a very interesting company. It's called Storefront. And what I like about this company, I think this is in New York. I think it's New York. But one of the things that's happening is that what's called brick and mortar, the brick and mortar retailers are experiencing a lot of problems. Is that? I can't spell. I think it's there. That's wrong too. Anyway, okay, brick and mortar. Anybody know how to spell it? The brick and mortar company, retailers, that's your traditional space. And there's a retailer, they're selling things, they're in this space. People can buy stuff on the internet now. So more and more items are migrating to the internet. So the brick and mortar, the physical space is becoming, in some places, is a decrease in demand for the physical retailing space. And actually New York is, I know this for sure in Manhattan, that they're experiencing a problem with that. And I think we're going to see that in a city like this. Probably sooner than later, we're going to see this kind of phenomenon. These people are, you can find temporary retail space. And basically people, they could be, you could be holding a party, you could be having a sale, a special, a few days to sell a certain product. And the thing is, you can go out and it's easy to advertise. You can get on Facebook or whatever kind of social network and generate demand temporarily. People can find you easily. They can get to you easily. So you could, in fact, be able to afford a very good space that's temporarily available. And if you can, if it's a good space and it's temporary, and you need it only temporarily, you'd be willing to pay a lot more money for it on a daily basis than if you had to take the risk of having a long-term lease. So now the ability to find temporary space is becoming possible. Now, what I think is interesting about it, and if you look at this, it says it was originally in New York, London and Paris, Los Angeles, San Francisco, the usual suspects. Then you got Hong Kong, Amsterdam, and Milan. I think Tokyo's missing there. Anybody want to go out and go out and start your local branch? There's an opportunity. There's a potential opportunity. There it is, right there. You want to go out and contact them and start your company. And you know why I say that? There's a space in my neighborhood. It's an old white neighborhood. It's full of warehouse space in Kotoku. And it's proving to be fantastic space for this kind of these kind of temporary businesses. I got right down my block. Right down my block is this. It's this old it's a warehouse, and it's now every 2 weeks they have like special clothing. They've got some company that came in and sold clothing for a few weeks. They had one time I went by, they were having an orchestra, like an orchestra is playing music. Every time I go by, there's something different that's going on there. This is going to happen here. It's happening, and right now, in fact, they were fitting it out. They were fitting it out for something else that's I don't even know what it is. I'll walk by in a few days, and it's going to be there. This is happening. It's going to be happening more and more in this city as this retail space, as the market softens for the traditional use of people all the time. That's going to start changing. And as I say, I've seen it in my neighborhood, maybe in your part of the city, you know, instead of Tokyo, somebody there's an opportunity. I saw that. Tokyo's not there yet. Somebody there. There's an opportunity, guys. You know, you want to go out and start a business or get involved with this business. There's a possibility. So that's one company that I find very interesting. This is another one that I found. Click and Boat. This one is a very what I think is interesting. This is a French company. I wanted an example that wasn't the U.S. This one is in France, and it's boat owners. Boat owners to rent their boat. Now, I have no ambition. I've never wanted to own a boat, personally. I've seen people that own boats, and usually the amount of time that they spend on them, and usually if they have enough money to own the boat, the amount of time that they spend on the boat compared to the amount that they pay for it, you know, they have to have a lot of money, and they're really showing off, and they can just throw it around. But you go, now these are some nice stuff here. Now this is, as I say, it's in France, south of France. You can rent the boat, you can rent somebody to show you around, you know. You're basically a tour. You can do your own tour, and you know, you do once a year, twice a year. Suddenly you can do whatever kind of, look at all these kind of different boats, rib boat, sailing boat, motor boat, catamaran, anything you want. And it's going to probably be, you know, it's now affordable. The average person will now be able to afford to rent a high quality and to match people, to match this. Now, these things have existed, but now it can exist in a big way because now you have all these different boat owners that can collect together. The boat owners are going to list their site because they'd like to be able to get some revenue out of it rather than just sitting in the dock all the time. You just will go walk around. The boats are usually just sitting, and they got to pay rent. You got to pay. You know, now you can actually earn an income stream from it, which may also, for some, could even have a positive impact on the number of boats made, or a higher quality, that the boat makers are going to be able to sell better boats. They won't be making low-end boats anymore. They're going to be making nothing but higher-end boats, because that's all that people are going to want. Why would you want to be on a silly little boat when you could be on a nice boat, because that's all you want to use it anyway? So that's what I'm going to ask you to do, is go out and find a couple of these companies. And as I say, I want you to dig around and find something interesting. Get on, as I say, this took me online economy, list of company, online company, boom, boom. You know, that took me 3 or 4 minutes to put this presentation together. So we're not talking about a lot of work, but that could be very valuable. You can get a nice list of companies. You might get some interesting ideas here, people. I also want to talk about, this is a little bit different kind of thing because it's a different kind of network externalities, and I'm very familiar with this because my brother invented. This is my brother invented this. This is something called a cold cart, and what it is, what this is that it's on a dolly. That's a dolly. This is for an airport tarmacs. So if you have a container of some perishable product, that's what happens is when you ship a perishable product. Okay, you ship a perishable product, and when you by air, in a container, you'll take the container, and you quite often the container has to sit outside. And it can sit outside for several hours, an hour, 2, 3 hours. Sometimes if the flight is delayed, it can be there all day. And when it's sitting out there in the sun, it's heating up, and and there's damage, and quite often there's damage. That the cargo experience, if it's temperature sensitive, it can experience damage. So what he did was, he owns a trucking company in Los Angeles, and he was looking at this, and he came up with this idea. What it is he just put basically a little warehouse on top of the dolly. That's the whatchamacallit, that's the air conditioning, or the heating, you can heat or air condition. So that keeps, so that's the temperature control. This has gone through many, he's patented it in 5 countries. Now the reason I mention that, you think, well, what does that have to do with network externality? And here's what it has to do. This will be an interesting, you'll find this an interesting lecture. When you go back and you see it after these people are somewhat tired. But at any rate, what makes this a network externality? Now what's interesting is that, and the most important application of this is in the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry, because the value of product that's shipped in the pharmaceutical industry, it's incredibly expensive. You can have shipments that just take an incredibly small amount of space that are worth in fabulous amounts of money. He told me about a shipment that he moved a shipment of just a few containers, and he said that the value of the cargo was just a few containers. It fit on 2 trucks. He could have actually put it on 1 truck. He could have put the entire shipment on 1 truck. He said the value of the shipment was $100 million. $100 million. That's what 10. Let's see, 100 million. $1 million. Anyway, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. Trust me. $100 million. You're talking about, but the problem is that when you ship these pharmaceuticals, it may be manufactured in one place, and it's going to be shipped, and it could be just ingredients or the finished medicine. It's going to go to, quite often it goes to different airports, and every time it stops at an airport to be transferred to another aircraft, it sits out and it's at risk. So what happens is that you have a network, and you have to have these at multiple locations, so that every time that it gets to a point, there has to be a cold cart at that point, so that then when it goes on to another point, to say its final destination, it's protected throughout. And one of the problems that he's experienced is that he's only had these operating in a few airports. It operates at LAX. I think they're not at San Francisco. They may be going to JFK in New York. They've been operating in Mexico City, but there's not the network isn't big enough. And he's been struggling to get the network large enough. So actually, I've been talking with one of your formers, a student that was here, a student here last year, and we're kind of talking about seeing if he can. I'm currently writing a proposal to create, both analyze the industry and create a business, a business plan, a business strategy to implement some kind of worldwide network of these machines. And the thing is, it's about network externalities. Is that if I can create a large enough network, if I can get a large enough network in enough airports around the world and to get them functioning, then it could be an enormous business. An enormous business. So this is the kind of possibilities. So one of the things I want you to do with this is to start thinking about in terms of these kind of networks. They're all over the place. Your networks are all over. They're everywhere now. These kinds of externalities. This is one of the most important things that we're going to in the economy now. Are these kinds of externalities? So keep that in mind. I think it's a really, really fascinating subject, and so. Now let's see. Did I talk about, oh, no, I didn't. Now we're going to change the subject. Now we're going to talk about diseconomies. Because there are economies, but there are also diseconomies of scale. Sometimes when the network gets bigger, when a place gets bigger, it can cause problems. And the problems are typically related to congestion. You can have congestion problems. But an external scale diseconomy, it's a diseconomy, that's a negative. As the size of something gets bigger, then negative things get bigger. It's diseconomies of scale experienced by the firm, but which are outside of the firm's control. That is, the cost of scale experience is exogenous to the firm. Outside of the firm, as the network or as the environment gets bigger. So this exogenous scale economy is something developed from an external factor or factors that is disadvantageous. I should say exogenous scale diseconomy. That is disadvantageous to the firm. And they also see the term negative externality. In fact, I would say that one of the negative externalities, for example, of having lunch just before this class is the fact that people can't stay awake during the lecture. So that is certainly a form of a negative externality that comes out of. So you should at least remember that. I think you get the idea there. Yes, he does. But that is something that's, well, it's outside our control. You got to eat lunch, and then you do that, and people can't stay awake. But at any rate, negative externality, it's the same thing as an external scale diseconomy. Exactly the same thing. Okay. So it's a cost, external scale diseconomy is some cost imposed by scale. It's a scale experienced by the firm experienced it, but outside the firm's control. And it's generated by some quality of the external environment itself. A disadvantage of scale, big sources of these are some type of congestion. Pollution. What's pollution? There's too much activity in one place. Activities that are part of producing, for example, having lots of automobiles is a positive thing. Everyone can get around, everyone can travel, you can get from place to place. But when you get too many automobiles, well, two things can happen, especially with the internal combustion engine, that the two things, there's congestion. Let's see, it's 2 o'clock. You go out right now, go out to the city center and get into a cab, you're going to be spending a lot of time. I assure you that if you were in a cab now, going towards Tokyo Station, you're going to spend a lot of time. You're going to be sitting in traffic. This time of the day is the worst time of day, 2 o'clock. There's a lot of congestion out there on the street. If you go to New York, you can have a lot of the day. And when it rains, forget it. You can't, you might as well just get out and walk. And if you're in Midtown Manhattan on a rainy day, the traffic can just go nowhere, and you might as well just get out and walk. And that's congestion. But there's also pollution. Pollution is also a scale diseconomy. There's lots of vehicles, or just people together. The city gets bigger. There's more activities. The activities create, as just people doing things, they create pollution. That comes from automobiles, that comes from factories, various activities that create what could be water pollution, air pollution, noise pollution. You walk around. I was sitting early evening. I'm sitting in my apartment, and the guys are sometimes they'll go around, the motorcyclists, they're out there making noise. There seems to be periods in the city where they do that. There was one time 20 years ago, it was all every night. And sometimes it'd be like for hours and and you could hardly sleep. It really was, there were times it was pretty bad. And then they got rid of it, and they just started arresting everybody, and they took care of the problem. But sometimes it comes up and lasts an hour, and a couple of guys are going it. You know, that's noise pollution. You know, that's an externality, you know, and actually those guys are going out just in order to annoy everybody else. You know that. What a wonderful thing. But any rate, but that's another. Those are all because of scale. Those are negative things that can happen because of scale. Pollution, as I say, it's a big one. This is Beijing. This isn't so long ago. I think this is like the last year or two. But you know, what's one of the interesting things, as I say, it's a scaleless economy because it's the byproduct of spatially concentrated economic activity. Because economic activity is concentrated in space, it's close together. It's created by every person participating in economic activity. The pollution exists because those who create the pollution do not individually pay for the pollution that exists. You just go around, you drive your car, or whatever, do whatever it is you're doing, you're creating pollution. Now you don't want to create the pollution, you just need to get around. But it gets created. And this is, the interesting thing here is that China, 30 years ago, China, in Beijing was all, everyone got around by bicycle. Now I've never been to Beijing, so but I know that, that 30 years ago, nobody owned a car. There was almost no private ownership. There was no ownership of vehicles. 40 years ago. Time's flying. Late 70s, early 1980s. Now, that's Beijing. Now, that's obviously in the winter. That also happens because of the winter traps air the way. But when I was a child, I lived in Los Angeles. And the air looked like this. It kind of looked like that in Los Angeles. And it was 50 years ago, it was a long time ago. And you know how I'm telling you how old I am. But I remember it was kind of there were days it looked like that. So that isn't just that. That's my memory in the U.S. That there were days that looked like that. So this isn't just something that's happening in China now or India now. This is something that, and I think this city had pollution that wasn't this far off 50 years ago. Something like, it would have looked something like this as well 50 years ago in this city. So, any rate, and as I say, it's far cleaner. Major cities is far cleaner. Los Angeles, every time I go back there, it's incredible for me how clean the air is. I remember where you never saw the mountains, it was never clear. It was always polluted. Now the air is reasonably clear. I saw tremendous pollution here, even in my time living here. It's much less pollution than when I moved here 25 years ago. A lot less. You know, so these things will change. There'll be improvements. There'll have to be adjustments. But that's a negative externality. That comes because of size. Congestion. Talked about auto traffic, but I'm sure many of you experience this on the trains. I'm trying to think of which. That's clearly some line, local line. It might be the.
Sure.
Is that the Chuo-sen?
Yeah. Right.
Is that the Chuo? It might be the Chuo-sen, and that's just the color. It should be a darker. It might just be the way the color comes out. One of the reasons why I would never live in that part of the metropolitan region is, to me, the Chuo-sen is just awful. I actually like living on the east side of the city because the trains are, there's much less congestion. There's much less congestion. You live on the west side, and I think a number of people in the class live on this side of the city. There's a lot more congestion on the train. You get to pay more for it too. You know, so you know, it's interesting. People are paying more for discomfort, and where I can live very close to the city center for less money and less congestion. It's funny how that works. But at any rate, as you know, rush hour, many lines. Anybody ever been on the Inokashira Sen at rush hour? Yeah, there's one. I've experienced the Inokashira at 8:30, you know. Oh boy, that's a nightmare. That's one of the worst lines, and there's no way. The terrible thing about the Inokashira is you can't increase the capacity. It's just, you know. And where other lines, what's interesting, in the time that I've lived here, you've had many more lines. The Oedo has been, the Namboku, the Oedo was completed, the Hanzomon, the extension of the Hanzomon, the Fukutoshin is another new line. Then it's like the Odakyu has had tremendous improvements. The Toyoko Sen, the Toyoko lines have had tremendous improvements. So you've had a lot of improvements in the rail system. And so it's actually reduced congestion. There's more capacity. There's more capacity, so it's actually significantly reduced. That's the congestion. So that's a solution there. But here, what's the solution to all this traffic? You can't really make the cars, I guess you could make them smaller, but that's kind of hard. You can tell cars they can't drive, or you could charge them to a fee to enter certain areas. Those are possibilities. But those haven't been done very much. But in other words, there are solutions. That's the thing, is we've talked about like the air pollution controls, improvements in the engine, improvements in efficiency, congestion from rail congestion, increase in services, new lines, increasing the number of trains on the line if you can do that. But here, this is a lot harder. Automobile is hard. The automobile is hard, especially when you have one or two people in a vehicle, as is quite often the case. So, one of the things that you have, this is just to give a kind of feel for what happens. Both positive and negative externalities are usually operate at the same time. Not always. It depends. Well, we'll get to communication network. Let's just think about, let's say, like congestion in the city. Let's say like say road congestion. So where the increase in the city side can cause increases in externalities, but quite often as the city gets bigger, the improvements get smaller and smaller. And at the same time, the negative externalities get bigger and bigger. So there's some point, it's just like a demand and supply of positive and negative externality. And this is some scale, this would be like some maximum, this is the positive, see this minus this is the net benefit. So this minus this is the net benefit. So much like a cost, like a marginal cost curve, and a marginal revenue curve, marginal benefit curve, and a marginal social cost curve. That's what's going on here. And the gap here is the net social benefit, and at this point is, and you know what this point would be? It's basically would be some optimal size. This is the size of say, the city. In other words, you would say a city, if a city is a certain size, that's the optimal size. That size where the city gets above that, the negative externalities are bigger. It becomes so big. That could be a lot of, it might not be more than pollution. For example, let's say as a city increases in size, and I think we've talked about this. Did we already talk about this? the wage increases, the cost of land increases, the cost of renting space increases. Now let's say you have a business and you're in an office building and the city is growing around you, your business is staying the same, you're not really increasing, or maybe you are increasing in revenue, but let's say the rent is going up faster than you're increasing revenue. That's a negative externality. That also is another negative externality. The size around you is getting bigger. Your own business might be growing, but not as fast as the rent. If that's taking place, that's a form of a negative externality. So that's another, that's another cause, is the city gets big. For example, in a lot of American cities, such as New York, the rents have gone up a lot in the last 15 years because the population is rising, but the new housing isn't keeping up. So the rents are increasing very rapidly. That's a negative. Rapid increase in rents is a negative externality. The way Tokyo has dealt with that, Tokyo, it's much easier to build. So Tokyo's had less negative externality from a big population growth because it's easy to develop in the city. So there's less of a negative externality. As I said, the point here is there's a lot of ways to think about externalities, negative externalities. It's a very interesting topic. And it covers, these topics cover a lot of very important issues. And one that a lot of people are talking about and interested in is climate change. Carbon dioxide is increasing in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, this is a diagram showing the global carbon cycle. And it's showing the global carbon cycle and what happens, all of the plants, the absorption in the soil, carbon dioxide that may come from volcanoes, deforestation of land use, ocean intake, ocean loss. But the big thing is burning fossil fuels. So humans are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide because we are mining hydrocarbons. We're burning them in order to create energy to power our economy, but it's changing the composition of the atmosphere. Yeah, the composition of the atmosphere has changed, and in parts per million, 250 years ago, the atmosphere had 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and now it's about 400. Now, we don't have time to go into this, but I've discussed, Yuan knows, I talked about this in the Global Studies class last year, what increasing carbon dioxide does in the atmosphere. And so basically it increases the atmosphere's ability to hold energy, hold the electromagnetic energy in the atmosphere, to retain it a little longer than it was 250 years ago. So the temperature, the atmospheric temperature is slowly increasing. It's increased to about a little bit more than 1 degree Celsius in the last century or so. So the question is, the direct effect is about, so far, is about 0.7%, and the total increase from a doubling from 280 to 560 would be about 1.2 degrees Celsius. Now that in itself is not the problem, because that's not big enough. There's something thought to be a feedback effect, and that's the question, how large the feedback effect is. We don't really know. Some people think it's large, some people think it's very small, some people think it's large. The world is slowly dealing with it. The amount of carbon dioxide is increasing, and it's likely to increase. China, India, other countries are going to develop. Even if the industrial countries stop their growth. Certainly a country like India, and maybe China, we've seen the big growth in the last 15 years. But India now is probably going to be a significant part of the increase in CO2 emissions in the next 20 years is going to come from the growth of India. So and Africa. Africa has very little. So Africa too, as Africa develops, and it will. India will develop. There's a lot of interesting things going on there that are going to create increased. The economy is going to grow, and there's going to be an increase in the output of CO2. That's going to happen. So that's a very important potential. It's a diseconomy. There could be some benefits, but there may be more negatives. And since there may be more negatives, we would call that a scaleless economy, a negative externality. So that's just a very interesting. As I say, what the interesting thing about all of this is that it's an enormous. The point here, you could spend a semester just talking about externality, these kinds of positive and negative externalities. So now we're going to move on, and we don't have time for that. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about input markets. Now I'm going to change topic. Then we're going to go back to the firm, and we're going to talk about input markets. And talk about how the firm, we've looked at output markets. Now we're going to look very closely at some basic concepts around input markets. And a very important one, a very, very important one is a concept called derived demand. That the input, that there's a link. The derived demand for inputs, the firm's demand for inputs is a function of the demand for the firm's output. There's basically a feedback loop. There's a feedback loop. So there's output, as demand for output increases, the demand for the input increases. So that's what's called a derived demand. And this has important implications for determining the value of inputs, and most importantly, the value of labor, capital, and land inputs. So labor, the wage, capital, the price of capital, the interest rates, and land inputs, the value of land that are used by the firm to produce its output. Now let's think about land. Let's look at this in terms of land. And land is, to some degree, that's becoming less important because as firms are operating on the internet. But land for most firms is still, you still have to have an office somewhere. You still have to have space. We still are physical. We have a body. We occupy space. We've got to have land. We have a demand for land somewhere along the line. So, where does the value of land come from? Why does it have value? One of the interesting things about this is when I came to this country, people really didn't understand why. Interestingly enough, they do now. But why is the value of a piece of property on Chuo-dori in Ginza, which is pretty much the top of the land market in Tokyo? Why is that higher than that piece of land the same size, say, in a neighborhood in Setagaya-ku? Why is it? It's the same size. Same amount of land. Take 1,000 square meters in Ginza, 1,000 square meters in Setagaya-ku. So a huge difference in the value. Where does that come from? Where does that difference in value come from? Well, here's the way to think about it. Here's how we want to think about why. And the way to think about it is it has to do with the income. The income that Ginza property can generate compared with the property in Setagaya-ku. That is the main thing. That's the concept. A Ginza property can generate far more income because rents are higher, and not only are rents higher, but you can construct a larger building. So there's two factors. One, it's in three-dimensional, not just two-dimensional space for the land, But in 3 dimensions, you can build a higher building, a taller building with more space. So you can get, well, not Giza, sorry. I'm going to change that. Giza, where's Giza? That sounds like it's like Gaza or something in the Middle East. Well, I don't think I mean, I'd like to go there, but, well, I don't know about there. But we're not there today. So those are both the 2-dimensional space. You can have more rent in 2-dimensional space and more space in 3 dimensions. So those are the 2 reasons why. So the greater value is a function of the income. That is the demand for the use of the property. Then the greater value of the gains of property is derived from the greater income. And what's the income? The income is the demand for the output. That's the derived demand. So the demand for the output creates the value of the input. That's the connection. The value, the demand for the output, that's the space in Giza, creates the value of the land, which is the input for the building. You need the land for the input. The demand for that creates, for the output, creates the value of the input. That's derived demand. Value of capital is a function of the value that's produced by the capital. Let's say a giant construction crane. Look around town, they're all over. You see giant construction, a lot of big construction projects going on. City Center is really some massive redevelopment going on in the center of the city. Especially Chuoku, near Eastern Tokyo Station. Some really, really big projects there. But so a crane capable of lifting a large steel beam is much more valuable than a small crane used to lift pianos into the upper floor of an apartment building. It's more valuable. So it's the value, there's more value that's produced. So the crane can do more lifting, so it's creating more value. It can do more work. It can be used, so the giant construction crane is used to produce buildings of great value, say where a smaller crane can produce a smaller building or less value. So that's an example of capital. Value of labor. Labor, it's the value of the output. Let's say if you go to work as a cook in say in an izakaya, some ordinary izakaya, what can the owner of the izakaya pay you? Well, as we're going to see, the izakaya owner can only pay you based on the value of what you produce. Can't pay you anymore. Because if you get paid more than that, then there's no, the business doesn't work. There's no reason to be a business. But in this example, let's say if you're a chef at a 3-star Michelin restaurant, and there's plenty, I think there's more 3-star Michelin restaurants in this city than anywhere in the world. And so you can go out, and if you have basically one of the wonderful things about this city is if you have if you happen, which I don't these days, but if you have your wallet is loaded with Ichimayan bills, you can go out and lighten your, there's plenty of restaurants around town that will allow you to lighten the weight on your wallet. So now imagine that a chef that works at that restaurant, they can afford, if they're creating, because what they're doing, they're creating that value. They're creating that value. If you're going and you're paying 40,000 or 50,000 or 80,000 or 100,000 yen for dinner, and you can do that in this city, I assure you. The chef is, they can afford to pay that chef a lot of money. The chef that can do that gets paid a lot of money. That's the derived demand. The value of their labor is derived, of that chef is derived from the value of the output that chef produces. And compare that with the izakaya. The one is a very specialized, a lot of training. The izakaya, you just kind of show up. and probably they'll train you on the job. So that's the concept of derived demand. And we're going to go on from that concept to talk about marginal revenue product. Marginal revenue product plays a huge role in determining the price of labor, the wage. And we're going to show you how that happens. And we make some definitions. Marginal revenue product is the additional revenue earned by adding one additional unit of input into the production process. So that is, if I add 1 unit of input, the input, let's say labor, if I add 1 more worker, how much more revenue do I earn? Well, we've talked about this before. Let me check my time here. We still have 7 minutes. We've talked about this before, but that is the additional revenue. The marginal revenue product of labor is the revenue earned by adding 1 additional unit of labor. So what we're going to show is that the wage is the marginal revenue product of labor. That's what, if I add a worker, the most I can pay that worker, is the additional revenue that they generate. That's the most I can pay them. So this repeats, this was on page, I think that is on page 192, I checked that. So what we have columns for the price of the output, the marginal revenue product. There's the units of labor, unit 5. The customers, that's the coffee shop. 0 to 50, marginal product. The output price, let's say it's 300 yen. Actually, it's 4, probably now, most coffee places it's 400, but this is cheap coffee these days. The marginal revenue product of labor, at the first 3,000. The second one produces additional 6,000. The third one produces 4,500. The fourth one produces 1,500. The fifth one produces nothing. I assure you that in this kind of model, basically what this means is that the owner of this firm that adds that 5th person, they can't afford to pay them anything. They say, I'm desperate to work. Well, this is and this is what an internship is. That would be an internship. I just want to get experience. Okay, well, if I add you, there's no extra benefit. But if you want to get the experience, that's okay. That's what an internship is. But these others, and you can see there's a peak and it goes down. And each one represents the maximum amount that the firm can pay. So then the question is, does the firm add the additional worker? And it depends upon the marginal revenue product, but also depends upon the cost, the total cost of adding that worker. And that's what we're going to go into. Because that gives us, as you can see, that should give you a good idea where wages come from. That's where a wage comes from for the firm. It doesn't come out of, it's not magic. Now you can, we have things called minimum wage. We have things called minimum wage. Minimum wage, that says that you have to pay the worker a certain amount. Well, again, the workers, that in the end, the worker is going to be hired if the firm can afford to pay that wage. So the marginal revenue product of labor tells us the value each additional worker provides to the firm. It enables the firm to choose the level of its workforce to maximize the profits. Now, we talked about the output choice, and where the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue. That point, that's the decision. That's the point that maximizes revenue. I'm sorry, maximizes profit. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Okay. And very important thing to remember is the marginal cost curve is the firm's supply curve. It's the willingness to supply to the market. That's its supply curve. That's what the marginal cost curve is. So we've talked about the coffee shop production of function. The marginal cost of labor is the wage rate. Now remember, since we're talking about perfectly competitive firms, the way the firm is a price taker. So the firm is a price taker, they have to pay the wage. They say, well, if they say, well, I can't pay you that, I'll pay you this. We'll say, I'll go across the street and get this. That's what the market is. And you're also assuming the worker knows that the worker knows that, and that that's the wage, and that's how the worker reacts. Each worker is the same no matter the number of workers. So that's another thing here is we're talking about, we have some kind of operation, you have every worker is the same, it's kind of a cookie cutter, it's a bit simple. But for something like a coffee shop, it's kind of the way the real world, it's kind of close to the way the real world works. So the profit maximizing firm will employ workers to the point where the marginal revenue product equals the wage rate. Because the marginal revenue product, that's the additional revenue, the wage rate is, the wage rate is the marginal cost. The wage rate is the marginal cost, the marginal product, the revenue product of labor equals the wage rate. That is the optimum choice that the firm makes. So let's look at this in terms of the labor supply curve for the firm and the industry supply curve. So we think about this in terms of the labor supply curve and the industry supply curve. And the marginal revenue product of labor then represents the firm's demand curve for labor in the same way that the marginal cost curve represents the firm's output supply curve. Okay, so the marginal cost curve represents the firm's output supply curve. And so here's the marginal product of labor. Say there's one machine, there, two machines, they add a second machine, changes the marginal revenue product of labor. And one of the interesting things here is you can see that at least one of the things that capital does, adding capital increases worker productivity. Now, in the case here, at least if the wages in a perfectly competitive firm, the firm is a price taker, so it may increase their demand for labor. But that's the market, and there's the demand curve for labor and the supply curve of labor, and this is where the wage is determined is here. The firm faces this; it's a price taker. This is the determination of the wage. We'll close there. Let's see. Okay, now that's not going to be a perfect picture because I couldn't figure out how to get it up. Never mind. But at least you'll know exactly where that is on your notes. So you'll find that useful.